Hey there guys, it's Tina and I am back. How you guys doing? You good? You good? I hope you're doing good. So we have a fun video for you guys today. Me have I have a fun video for you guys today. It is a tag video and it was created by Samantha and Allie Glines here on YouTube. And I watched both of those videos along with a couple more videos from some of the other people that I watch here on YouTube. And I think this is just a fun tag. So it's the eyeshadow palette tag. I think it's like 2.0 because there's already an eyeshadow palette tag and I've done that like way back in the day. I will link it over here so you can check it out, but this is a new 2020 version of the eyeshadow palette tag, and I thought this was like the perfect timing for this video because I just went through my makeup collection. I went through all the palettes in my collection. I went through the smaller palettes, the medium-sized palettes, I went through all my large palettes, and it was like, oh my god, this is the perfect time. It's like they knew I was going through my collection, and I'm so excited to do this tab because I feel like my collection is so fresh in my mind. Like I can definitely answer most of these questions, and I say most because there are like maybe two questions that I kind of don't have answers for. So let's go ahead and jump into the eyeshadow palette tag, or all about my eyeshadow palettes. So the very first prompt is to share your newest eyeshadow palette, and this is gonna surprise a few of you guys because I am not gonna post my eyeshadow palette collection just yet. I'm gonna post it after this video, so you'll hear about it in that video, but I'm gonna sneaky peek tell you what my newest eyeshadow palette is. It is the Anastasia Beverly Hills and Jackie Aina collaboration palette. I know, you guys are like, what? What? So I did a ranking video of my ABH palettes. I will link it over here so you can check it out. And I mentioned that I know a lot of you guys love the Jackie Aina palette. I've heard nothing but rave reviews about it, but I didn't like the color story. And you guys were like, no, you should get it because it's so awesome, it's so great, it's one of the best they've ever done. And I swatched this in store, and I do agree that the formulation is pretty great in this. I think it's better than a lot of their palettes, but I wasn't big on the color story. Like, I don't like the purples and the mauve tones at all. Like, I think these shades look ugly on my skin tone, but I picked it up because it was on sale, and I'll have it for reference. And I do like the brown shades, like this side of the palette over here, except for the gold. I do like those shades, and I can get into these bronzy golds. But then like these 6 pans in the palette, I'm not the biggest fan of. But I decided to pick it up on your recommendation, and I do want to have it as reference in my eyeshadow collection. So yeah, I did pick it up. Next up, it says to show your oldest eyeshadow palette, and I had to do a little bit of digging in my memory, and I even went on my blog to discover like what my oldest palette is, because I used to have a blog back in the day. I haven't posted to my blog in years, but it's still available, like it's still up. So I went back in my archives and I'm like, what was my first eyeshadow palette? And I know I've gotten rid of tons of products in my collection. Like I've decluttered, I've gotten rid of expired products, I've gotten rid of products that I don't love anymore. But the oldest palette in my collection would be the Urban Decay Naked palette. And here's the thing, this is one of the very first like mainstream eyeshadow palettes that I ever purchased. Eyeshadow palettes weren't a big thing back in the day when I started collecting makeup. In fact, I think everybody on YouTube had those 120 eyeshadow palettes or the 88 eyeshadow palettes that you could get off eBay for like $19.99. Like that's how we used to roll back in the day because brands didn't really have eyeshadow palettes, and that's the way we all got to play with color and figure out what we really liked. So Urban Decay was one of the first brands, like mainstream brands, to actually release a palette. Like there were quads and quints and single eyeshadows, that's what we all filled our collections with, but there were no like big eyeshadow palettes on the market, and this was considered big when it was released because it has 12 shades. And since then, everybody has palettes now. Palettes are like the new craze, and Urban Decay was the one that we should give credit for starting that craze, because if it wasn't for them, other brands wouldn't think it was okay to come out with eyeshadow palettes, because everybody on YouTube had the Naked palette. Like that was the palette to get, and because of that, other brands were like, oh, they do want palettes, so they started releasing larger palettes, and we have Urban Decay to thank for that. Now this palette isn't the original palette that I purchased. I've gotten rid of that one. It's older. The original one had a dual-ended pencil. Oh my god, I love that. It had like a black and brown pencil in it. But then they couldn't produce and manufacture the pencils as quickly, so they replaced it with a brush. You guys, a little bit of makeup history. The original palette did come with a pencil, but now it comes with a brush. And Urban Decay had sent me the original palette, I think a couple of years ago, and I replaced the OG one in my collection with the newer one because this is like less dated. So really by age, it's not the oldest palette in my collection, and that's why I am adding a couple more into this little question part. I also have the Kat Von D Mi Vida Loca palette. Do you guys remember this? This was the original Mi Vida Loca palette. So everybody goes crazy about the Mi Vida Remix palette, but this one was the original palette, and it had 8 shades in here, and they're pretty like ho-hum pastel shades. They weren't the best quality, but this was the original palette. She used to do palettes in this form. This is the plastic one, but she also had like cardboard versions of these. I remember these palettes so fondly because so many people were collecting these. I think Kat Von D was one of them that really stepped up the game with the eyeshadow palettes. Like, she was doing a lot of eyeshadow palettes. Another one that I have in my collection is the Ladybird palette. This was an all matte palette, and I love the shade selection in this palette. I thought it was fun. It was one of the first like all matte palettes, and I really enjoyed it, so I thought I would share that with you. And then another one, oh my god, is the Barbie Heart Stila palette. I know, right? Isn't this cute? Do you guys remember this? People went crazy over this. It's really a quad because it has 4 pans in it, but each of the pans has 3 shades, so it's 12 shades altogether. This was an existing palette. They already had this, but they just rebranded it to do the Barbie collection. But yeah, this was so fun to discover in my collection. I was going through everything and I'm like, throwback! The next prompt is to show your most expensive palette, and a lot of people have been showing their Natasha Denona palettes and their Pat McGrath palettes. And when I thought about it, I'm like, technically, Pat McGrath would be my most expensive palette per shade, because there are 10 shades in those palettes, like the Mothership 10 pan palettes, and those are $125. So those are expensive palettes. However, price point wise, my most expensive palette is my Viseart Grande Pro Volume 1 palette. Now, there are more expensive Grande palettes. So the Grande palette, Pro palette 2 and 3, I believe, are $175. Pardon? No, absolutely not. I never picked those up, but I do have the original one, and this retails for $140. Now, it has a ton of shades in here, so if you break down the price per shade, then kind of works out. So Pat McGrath per shade would be more expensive, but price point wise, the Viseart palette would be my most expensive one. But I also know that the most expensive palette that I did buy was from Natasha Denona. Her original 28 pan eyeshadow palettes, those are $239, and I purchased both of those from Beautylish until she called me unprofessional and said I didn't know what I was talking about, and I was like, oh, is that a fact? Yeah, Beautylish, take this shit back. I'm not supporting Natasha Denona, and so I got rid of those palettes. But yeah, Viseart would be my most expensive palette. And then it says to show your most affordable palette, and this is gonna be the same as quite a few people. That would be my bite-size eyeshadow palettes from e.l.f. Cosmetics. These were recently released. A lot of people picked these up. They are $3 eyeshadow palettes. You can get them on the e.l.f. website, Target. They're also at Bed Bath & Beyond, Harmons, various online retailers. You can also get them at Ulta, so drugstore, all over the place you can find these for $3. And you get 4 shades in here. And I was debating, like, are we calling these palettes or are they quads? At what point do we call a palette a palette? At what number of shades is it considered a palette? Because to me, 4 is a quad, 5 is a quint, and then 6 and above is a palette. But then these are still, I don't know, because then a duo is just a duo, right? And then a trio. Are those considered palettes as well? I don't know, so I'm gonna just go along with everybody else and say that 4 eyeshadows still constitutes a palette, and my most affordable would be the e.l.f. bite-size eyeshadow palettes. And then it says to show your everyday palette. And here's where I don't have an answer for you, because if I did answer this, I'd be lying through my teeth, because I truly don't have an everyday palette. Like, there's so many palettes that I incorporate. I love single eyeshadows, so I mix and match different things all the time, and I don't have like a go-to eyeshadow palette. Like, I don't have an everyday eyeshadow palette, and it for sure would not be a neutral palette because I love color. So unfortunately, I don't have an answer, but maybe you guys can tell me what your everyday eyeshadow palette is. Like, give me some ideas. I really don't have one, so I'm not gonna lie to you guys and give you an answer. Yeah. Then the next prompt says to show your most colorful palette, and again, I don't have an answer for this one because I have so many colorful palettes. You guys, if you follow me, you know I love a colorful eyeshadow palette. I have so many colorful eyeshadow palettes, and I'm gonna go ahead and just link my collection video once it goes live so you can check that out. You will see all my colorful eyeshadow palettes. You will see like a ton of them, and then you can probably tell me which one is my most colorful one, because I have rainbow palettes, I have bright palettes, I have neon palettes, I have pastel palettes. Like, I don't really have one that would be considered my most colorful because I have a ton of colorful palettes. Then it says to show your smallest palette, and this again is up for debate with me. Like, what's a palette? A duo, a trio, a quad? Like, at what point do we consider it a palette? So I am kind of juggling between these two sizes, because if I measure them volume wise, like, I can get into the mathematical volume, dimension, all of that. I can do it, okay? But I have the e.l.f. palettes, which are the bite-sized palettes, which are the 4 eyeshadows. And then I have my trios from Smashbox. And they call these palettes, no they don't, they call them trios. So this is the Photo Edit Eyeshadow Trio. And these have 3 eyeshadows in here. So what are we considering the smallest? Like, what do you guys think? I'm not sure, but these are the smallest little palettes I have in my collection, and I don't really like small eyeshadow pans, so I wouldn't truly pick up like small eyeshadow palettes. Like the Viseart, I know Viseart has the little mini edit palettes, and then Natasha Denona has her mini palettes. I could never, okay? I could never get into those tiny palettes. I can't do it. Even the ColourPop palettes, like those 9 eyeshadow palettes, I can't. There's the little pans, I can't. I don't know, like, they feel like play makeup to me. They remind me of when you were a little girl and you were playing dress up and you had the little, no, I just can't. I don't know what it is, but I can't get into small eyeshadow pens. I can't do it. And then on the flip side, I need to show you my biggest palette. And again, I went through my collection, so I know what my biggest palette is. Like, I have palettes that are larger than this, but they have single eyeshadows in them, so I built them myself. They're not like official palettes. They didn't come pre-assembled like a predetermined color story. I chose those myself, so I'm not gonna talk about those, but I have huge like magnetic palettes with singles in there. But my largest pre-made palette happens to be the Mi Vida Loca Remix palette from Kat Von D. Everybody went crazy over this palette. It's huge. Like, I don't even know. Even the Morphe palettes, those huge 35 eyeshadow palettes, are still not as big as this palette. So this slides out, all those eyeshadows, and you might be like, that's your most colorful palette, Tina. I have other colorful palettes too. Maybe this is my most colorful palette. Why? Because it has the most shades? I don't know. But yeah, my largest palette is the Mi Vida Loca Remix palette. So, big old palette. Then it says to show your palette with the best memory. And I really had to think about this. I'm like, which eyeshadow palette has the best memory for me? I'm not sure, like, I use so many different palettes. I don't like dwell on one palette for too long. Like, I mix, I mingle, I try new things. Like, I'm all over the place with eyeshadow palettes, right? But I'm gonna say the Urban Decay Naked palette because it's my first eyeshadow palette. We have so many memories with this on YouTube. Like, when YouTube was just a little baby and the beauty community was just thriving and everybody loved the Naked palette. Everybody had the Naked palette and we did multiple looks. Like, everybody was like, oh, show your looks with the Naked palette. And it was such a fun time. Like, it reminds me of old school YouTube, and that's why I would say it's one of my best memories. memories, and Urban Decay was one of the first brands that actually sent me PR too. So I also associate this palette with being recognized with one of the bigger mainstream brands. Like, they still send me PR to this day, and I just love the brand and the PR team. Like, they've never like stopped sending me things. They've never dropped me. You know, I just have fun memories, man. So my little Urban Decay Naked palette, the original. Love it. Now it's asking for a palette that we think is worth the hype. And for me, I'm gonna kick it old school. I'm gonna take it back. I think the Too Faced Chocolate Bar palette was definitely worth the hype. Back in the day, this got so much hype. Like, everybody, just like the Naked palette, everybody was into the Too Faced Chocolate Bar palette. And for me, it was definitely a great palette. It still is, honestly. Like, it still has its place in the eyeshadow game, and it was really worth the hype. And it was the first time like Too Faced did a scented palette, and we fell in love. Like, it smells like chocolate, and we're like, oh my god, we love it. And they even redid the packaging because this was thicker, and then it didn't have the names on the palette itself, and I actually ended up getting the newer version and got rid of my older one. But I did a video on this, and that was kind of one of my first palette review videos, and I had so much fun with this palette and so much fun with that video. And I had fun with this palette over the years, and I definitely think it was worth the hype. And I mean, look at what it created, because Too Faced has done so many of these chocolate style palettes right now. Even Makeup Revolution did their own spin-off. So I do think this palette was worth the hype. Alright, on the flip side, it says to show a palette that is not worth the hype. And for me, oh, this is gonna be controversial. I know. I really don't think Modern Renaissance was worth the hype. I really didn't like this palette, like, at all. Like, whoo, didn't like it. I still don't like it. This color story, I know it like changed the landscape of makeup palettes because a lot of people went warm. Like, this is not even considered a warm palette. If you really look at it, this is not a warm palette considering all the warm orangey tones that we see on the market now. But this changed the game for a lot of us. But I never liked it. Like, I could never get it to really look great on my skin tone. And for me, it's just not worth the hype. And I know a lot of people love it, so like reserve like the attacks and stuff, but I'm just gonna say it ain't worth the hype. Now it says to show my favorite palette from a favorite brand, and I have to think about it. Like, I have brands that I love for different reasons, but I don't have like an official favorite brand. I do have brands that make my favorite eyeshadow formula, and I'm gonna choose my favorite palettes from those brands. Does that? Alright, that works. We're just gonna make it work for us, okay? So, I love Ace Beauté. I love their eyeshadows. I love their formulation. And if you know me, you can probably guess my favorite palette from that brand. It's the Oceanic palette. Oh my god, I love this palette, okay? I love the blues, I love the greens, I love the teals, I love the shimmers, I love the mattes. And it has a neon, that's my favorite, like neon green, and it works so well. Like, this palette, come on, I love a blue. You know this. Like, blue is my favorite eyeshadow next to like teal. So I love this palette. So it would be from Ace Beauté, their Oceanic palette, and then my two other favorite brands. Alright, so have you guys guessed that Menagerie Cosmetics was next? So my favorite palette from Menagerie Cosmetics is the Killer Purr palette. I love this palette. This is such a beautiful palette for everyday. Like, it has so many neutral colors, and they just work on my skin tone, and I can get a variety of looks from this palette. Everyday looks and like sassy looks as well. And the shadows are so creamy, and I just love this palette. Alright, to be fair, their other palettes are killer as well, but if I had to choose one, it would be this one. So I love the Killer Purr palette from Menagerie Cosmetics. And then the last brand, you guys probably already guessed, it's Give Me Glow Cosmetics. I love their palettes as well. I love their eyeshadows. I have a ton of their singles. Love them, right? And I had to go through and be like, well, which one is your favorite so far? And I'm gonna go with the Grunge palette. This is a beautiful neutral palette, and it has grungy shades. I love deep shades because rich shades just show up better on my darker skin tone. And I love this palette, and I love matte, so you know I'm gonna love this. So this is like a great neutral palette for me. I love this palette. I also love like the summer vibes and the staple palette, but I just feel like the grunge palette would be my go-to palette from Give Me Glow Cosmetics. So those are my favorite palettes from my favorite eyeshadow brands. And then the very last prompt says to show your most used palette. And I have trouble with this again because I switch it up. I just use whatever, whenever, however. But I went through my playlist, like my videos for the last year, and I was like, what palette did you use a lot? Like, what palette did you keep pulling out? And then I thought about the palettes that I took on vacation, that I traveled with. So I have 3 palettes in here, and 2 of them are repeats from other questions. But the Ace Beauté Oceanic palette, I use this so much on my channel. I was surprised when I was going through. I was like, oh, you use this a lot. And I did use this a lot, and I used it a lot just off camera as well. So yeah, this is one of my most used palettes from 2019 into 2020. I just love these shades, and I love this palette, and that neon just, it gets me every time. And then the other palette that I was traveling with that I used a lot, I used for Carnival, I used for my summer looks, I used for my bright looks, it was this palette, and I love it. It's the Vibes palette, again, the Bright Vibes palette from Violet Voss. It's just one of my most used palettes overall from 2019. Like, once I got it, I didn't put it down, and every time I think of doing a bright look, I pull this out. So one of my most used palettes. And then the last one is the Impulsive palette from Melt Cosmetics, believe it or not. I traveled with this a lot. I really like this palette. Again, I used it on my channel quite a few times, and then I also used it off camera, and I traveled with it. Like I said, I took it on vacation, business trips. So I got a lot of use out of this palette. I wish the packaging was much different, but yeah, I use this palette a lot as well. So those are my 3 top most used palettes in 2019 coming over to 2020. So I figured, let's just tweak that question a little bit to suit my lifestyle and how I use my makeup palettes. And yeah, those were my 3 most used palettes. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I will leave links to all the palettes down below. I won't give it away though. I won't give it away. I'll just leave the links if you want to check them out. I will also leave links to the originators of this palette tag. So Samantha March and Allie Glines. Thank you guys for creating this tag video because I think it's really fun and a lot of people have been doing it. So I know it's like bringing the community together, and I love when tag videos do that. Like, you have everybody doing it, and it's so much fun because you get to see what other people are thinking. Yeah, and you get to kind of peek into their minds, into their collections, and it's just a fun time. So hopefully you guys, again, enjoyed this video. I will leave the questions down below, so if you want to answer them as well or do your own video, feel free, consider yourself tagged. I tag you, and you can also leave your answers in the comments below because we want to share and see what y'all got going on over there too. And if you don't have answers to some of the questions like I didn't, then just skip them, right? It's okay. And I will also leave links to my Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat, where you can follow me along. And until my next video, which will be very soon, and if you want to see my makeup palette collection, which is coming up very soon, then make sure you're subscribed, hit the notifications bell, and if you want to try it out, like unsubscribe and resubscribe. I know a lot of people have been having trouble with notifications, so maybe try that out. And until my next video, which will be very soon, I'll talk to you. Bye guys.